probably about, half a foot, 2 feet deep. And so you turn around not wanting to risk it because you don't want to become another statistic or another person that needs to be rescued. And then you turn around and you find that a flash flood has happened on the road that you just took in, and suddenly you're blocked from going that way. And so we've done a lot of sort of twisting and turning through the streets of Houston to get around to try to access various parts of the city to continue to tell you the story of this storm. And I'll just show you, I'll just step out of the way here. There's a taxi that's coming through, and we'll see if this taxi attempts to make it through the intersection. This is the decision a lot of people are making. They get to the intersection and they sort of stop. He looks like he's going to make it, or try to make it through, and it looks like he's going to make it. Not sure where he's going. There's a median right there on the other side of that intersection. So now you're seeing people are driving. Now he's on the other side of the road to avoid some of the water. There's a person on the other side who's decided that they're simply not going to go. So hopefully you can catch that. I know it's a little difficult to operate in these conditions for our cameraman, especially with the rain pretty much falling on us constantly. Cheryl, let's go for another question. FEMA is delivering resources as best they can. They're taking cues from local officials at the moment. Some places have run out of food, but as we were driving around, we did see a number of stores and grocery stores that were open, and so of course you can imagine a lot of cars there. Here's local police just behind us right now, going through this intersection as well. But in terms of supplies, the mayor held a news conference a short while ago and saying that they need deliveries of blankets, of clothing, food, diapers, formula for young children and little babies. I mean, we were at the shelter last night and I saw a woman who was there with a baby who was just a week old, if you can imagine that. She had 2 other kids and one of her babies was just a week old. So if you can imagine, just having given birth and now suddenly being forced out of your home, having to live out of a shelter, that's just one example of what people were going through. And we met another woman yesterday, had 5 children, ages 1 through 12, and she left her home because of the floodwaters, wouldn't get on the bus to get to the shelter, and so she ended up walking through water and got to a spot like this where the water was probably about just below her waist. She decided she had to get across, and so she ended up carrying all 5 of her kids across to get to safety, to get to the other side. I asked her how it felt, and she basically said, I wasn't feeling anything at that point. It was simply just instinct. And so that's a power crew there, just going through the intersection right now. They've been keeping busy. Rose has just asked a very important question, which a lot of people are asking. She wants to know why the mayor didn't ask people to evacuate, and that was something that was being debated in the lead up to this storm. And on Friday there was actually a bit of back and forth between the mayor and the governor, with the governor saying don't stay in your homes until it's too late, the mayor saying no, stay in your homes, that's the safest place to be. And basically the decision came down to the fact that this metropolitan area around Houston is the 4th largest metropolitan area in the country, and so you have between 4 to 6 million people in this area. And in a previous storm, what had happened was they decided that's what they were going to do. They were going to evacuate the city, and so they did what transportation people called contraflow, which is where they reversed the direction on the highway so both sides are going in one direction, which was out of the city. But even in that case, the lanes were completely full. Traffic was backed up, people were running out of gas, the weather was incredibly hot, people died of heat exhaustion, there was a number of deaths as a result of accidents, and it ended up causing a number of problems. And so this was a situation that officials here were weighing leading up to the storm. Was they didn't know where the storm was going to hit exactly. They didn't know which path these unpredictable hurricanes would take. They didn't want thousands and thousands of people stuck on the road and then suddenly getting hit. Imagine that disaster that would have been taking place if you had a roadway or flooding and suddenly you had thousands of people stuck in their cars on a major highway, many of which are underwater right now. So that was the decision. They felt that they could do a better job of keeping people in place, having to rescue them, putting them into shelters. And so that essentially was the thought process from officials here that there were simply too many people to evacuate. And in hindsight, I think they're saying that they made the right decision and that they felt that that was still the best option to go, because there was simply no place for all those people to evacuate and not enough time to get them all out of the city. Cheryl, let's go for another question. Lilia is asking, where are we staying if everywhere is flooded? Another good question. We were in a hotel downtown, and up until last night, actually, the downtown, like the core itself, areas around it were flooded, and it was very difficult to get out of the downtown core, but the core itself hadn't flooded until last night, where we started to see a number of streets flooded with heavy rains overnight. Our hotel has been okay for the most part. The biggest concern for us is when we venture out into areas like this, even though we're on a good day with no rain and no flooding 20 minutes away, it could take us an hour and a half now to get back, and that is if the roads are passable. So there's, you know, we always take the risk when we're out and about trying to gather for our stories that we may not be able to get back to our hotel, but of course, fingers crossed, we'll be able to do that tonight. Ashley wants to know if we get danger pay. Sadly, no, but if you do want to send an email to my bosses at CBC, I'd be happy for you to suggest that. No, this is part of the job. Yeah, my cameraman Jason definitely gives me a thumbs up for that suggestion. This is part of the job. I mean, these are the risks we take. I mean, we do have hazardous zone training, which prepares us in as much as you can be prepared for situations like this, and obviously we don't take undue risks. I mean, we pulled over here on our way somewhere else because we didn't want to navigate through this section, and we probably still won't. We'll probably, after this is done, turn around and head off in another direction. But as you can see, we're about to see now, if Jason can pan over, here's a few cars now, and they're going to maybe try to go around. We'll see what they decide to do. This one has a family of 6 in there, and they seem to be in good spirits, but I'm not sure if they're going to want to traverse this roadway. Cheryl, let's go for another question. It looks like they're going to try to turn around. Matthew and Leo want to know where people can donate. The Red Cross obviously is a good stop. Unfortunately, I don't have the information accessible on my phone because if I take out my phone, it's going to get soaked and broken right now. But I think if you start with the Red Cross, that's probably your best bet. There are some numbers you can text to donate supplies. I think often, as is the case in these disasters, they say money is the best option so they can buy the supplies locally. The tricky part here is that it's not really a recovery effort yet. They're still dealing with rescue efforts here, and so even just getting supplies to people is very difficult. So unfortunately, I say my best bet is to go online and see what you can find in terms of where it is best to direct your resources right now, because logistics with a storm like this, which is still continuing, is very much a challenge at the moment. So Kimberly wants to know how much more rain we're expected to get, and before I answer that, just to remind folks who are just joining us, my name is Stephen D'Souza with CBC News, and we're here in sort of the northeast part of Houston taking your questions. Please continue to ask them in the comments section. Cheryl Brown, our producer in Toronto, is speaking to me in my ear, giving me the questions. And Kimberly was just asking, how much more rain can Houston get? The current forecasts call for anywhere from 400 to 500 millimeters, 25 inches or so of rain throughout the rest of the week. That's about as much as we've already gotten. If you think about that, that's essentially a year's worth of rain for this area in the span of less than a week, just a handful of days. So imagine wherever you live, the worst storm you've had, multiply that by 1,000, and you pretty much can understand what we're experiencing here. Cheryl. Lynn is asking how information is getting out to locals. This is a case where local news really is playing a vital role. Local TV, local radio, social media as well to a certain extent, but you turn on the local stations here, the weather guys have been basically haven't slept in the last 4 days, giving the latest models, giving the latest information on shelters, where to go, traffic updates, local radio as well. And as well, cell phones are very important with flash flood alerts. I've been getting them as soon as you get into this area. The American system allows for your phone to pick up whatever alerts is put out by the whatever local agency is the area you're in. So my phone is buzzing constantly with tornado warnings, flash flood warnings, if that's the case. So that's definitely another way of getting information out to keep people safe as best they can. And of course, we try to impart stuff as well. So that's the way information is getting out. Sorry, I think I'm getting some water in my boots here. I'm just trying to see how that happened. I don't know. Oh, Cheryl, more questions for me, please. Tyler, unfortunately, the last number I heard was there were 5 deaths attributed to the storm. I believe there were some in a fire as well. Unfortunately, there was a few people trapped in cars who the water just rushed too quickly and they weren't able to be rescued. We have seen some very heroic and heartwarming stories of people being rescued, but in situations like this, there have been some deaths, and that is the unfortunate tragedy of the situation, that as much as people can be warned and as much as you can have the forecasting models, when wind and rain and the force of nature comes in like that, sometimes people do get caught unprepared, and there is still the danger that that number could go higher because the waters haven't receded, and they're not going to recede for a while now, and the rain is still coming, and so this catastrophic flooding that we're seeing is going to continue. And so that means rescuers can't get to every spot that they can. I think I might have mentioned earlier the 56,000 calls that 911 received. They've managed to get the number of calls that they've had to put on hold or haven't been able to answer down to about 10 or so. So that means that's how many are sort of waiting in the queue. But when you think of how many people are in need of help and the situation with the flooding and how much water is gathering, that tells you that there still could be people trapped in their homes in very dire situations that can't be reached. And so the heartwarming thing about all that is that we are seeing a lot of volunteers, people coming to the shelters, people bringing their boats out to try to help as best they can. And so with every tragedy, the thing we see whenever we cover these kinds of stories is that we see the worst of nature, the worst of the climate, but we see the best in humanity in terms of helping their fellow person and helping people get out of these situations. Cheryl, let's if we have another question. That's a very good question. That's one area I have to admit I haven't been able to look at as closely because so much of the focus has been on Houston, but so much of the American oil refinery capacity is along the Gulf Shore, and a number of those areas were evacuated and put on hold because of the conditions that we're dealing with. We did meet some people in our hotel who work in the control centers for the pipelines, and they were staying in the hotels working 24-hour shifts, trying to keep things working as best as possible. And I know from reading this morning that some areas they were trying to get to only today to assess the damage, and you're probably noticing in the area you're in that gas prices are probably going up, and that's a result of the situation down here and the slowdown in production. But I can't give you specific numbers in terms of damage or cost or slowdowns right now, so I apologize for that, but that's something we can definitely look into and try to bring to you later on. I think, yeah, so we're at the 20-minute mark, everyone, and I appreciate everyone who's joining in, and I think we'll take a couple of more. Just as much as we love to do these, and I love to answer your questions, the rain, I don't mind getting wet, but the rain does wreak havoc on our equipment, and to continue to bring the story, we want to make sure we don't get our camera too waterlogged. So Cheryl, we'll take a couple more questions, and then before we wrap it up. Yeah, the looting situation is a question that a viewer on YouTube wants to know about, and that was a fear. And in fact, they brought that up in the earlier news conference. They said they did arrest 4 individuals for looting. I did see a small handful of images on social media, but it hasn't really been as big an issue here as you think, mostly because people simply can't get out. And if you were going to loot, you weren't going to get very far, really, because you'd essentially be robbing your own neighborhood, which I don't think anyone really wants to do. So Looting doesn't seem to be as big an issue. The officials were playing it down at this point, but it is definitely still a concern when you have shops boarded up, people not really watching stores and not really keeping an eye on things. So that will be a concern most likely in the days ahead as well. But for now, it's been a minor issue. One viewer watching wants to know where Donald Trump is. Donald Trump has been monitoring the situation closely on his Twitter feed. He has been praising the work of local officials and agencies, talking about how great the cooperation is amongst them. The White House did announce yesterday that he is coming to Texas tomorrow. The FEMA director, who's on his way here today, was asked about that, where Donald Trump will be, what the details are. Last I checked, I haven't looked in a little while, but last I checked they haven't given any details about where he'll be, whether he'll be coming to the Houston area or visiting Rockport or Corpus Christi or some of the areas that took the initial brunt of then Hurricane Harvey along the coast. So it's not clear where the president will be. The airports, as last I heard, were still not really taking in flights in Houston because of all the flooding. So it'll be interesting to know where he'll be landing. He may not be able to fly into Houston. So I think with that, I appreciate all the questions for everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are going to wrap it up here from Northeast Houston. My name is Stephen D'Souza. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and I hope we answered your questions as best you can. And stay tuned to CBC News Network, CBC.ca, and our Facebook page for more updates on the ongoing situation in Houston and across Southeast Texas. Thanks again. Do you want to see something funny now? Hold on.